Hey everyone, and welcome to this week's Emerging Technology and Science News from me, your host, Matthew Griffin. So, better known as the fanatical futurist, I track over 600 emerging technologies, 350 megatrends. I've written 15 books on the future, which you can download for free. So if you want to learn about the latest emerging technologies, whether it's DNA, computers, whether it's liquid artificial intelligences and everything else, then you can download this little mini monster book. If you want to learn about the latest trends, then you can download this little mini monster book, again from the 311institute.com website. There are over 600,000 hand-researched stats in there, if I can say the word research properly. And then, of course, if you want to launch your own multi-billion-dollar enterprise, then why not use the same books that companies like Samsung, ARM, Huawei actually use? And this is the complete A to Z of innovation. So, everything that I do, everything that I create, I try to give away for free, which is why I'm not a best-selling author. So, haha. Now, this is my blog. So I've got two YouTube channels, the 311institute.com YouTube channel, basically, which has got 120,000 subs, and then the Fanatical Futurist YouTube channel, which is now at about 725,000 subs as well. So thank you for subscribing. And this week, we're going to be going through a variety of different things that I've actually been seeing. So what I try to do is I try to bring together all of the interesting news that I've actually seen, but set it against some of the other things that I've been seeing so we can put everything into context. And so while some of the news that I see originally kind of looks dull, boring, mundane, inconsequential, quite often it has a bigger meaning, a bigger impact than you actually might think. And with no further ado, that brings us actually on to my first news article. Now, this company called Welded Loops, based out of the Netherlands, has actually just created the first shoe out of a single material. Now, I know what you're thinking. That's not that hard. Also, why should we care? Now, about a year ago, I did a keynote, which you can actually see in the article, on the future of footwear. So I work with organizations like Nike, Under Armour, Adidas, and so on and so forth. And every year, consumers around the world buy 22 billion pairs of shoes. But we only recycle about 500 million of those. So the vast majority of shoes actually go into landfill. Now, that's for kind of two reasons. On the one hand, humans are just lazy. But on the other hand, shoes are one of the hardest things to recycle, especially the soles of your shoes. If you've got kids basically that do sports, then you've probably been buying the Adizero shoes, basically with carbon fiber plates in them and God knows what. Or the Nike Flyknits or whatever it happens to be. Now, when we actually think about the sole of a shoe, it's actually made up of a variety of different materials, polymers, composites, and so on and so forth, leathers, etc. And for recyclers, trying to recycle these shoes and trying to separate out all of these different materials is pretty much impossible. So even if you do put your shoes into the recycling bin or you take them down to the recycling centers, the fact of the matter is they end up just getting ground up and just sort of generally sent to biomass for waste, or biomass energy plants, basically for waste. So in this particular sort of piece of news here, Welded Loops have created the first shoes from a single material. Now, they look really butt ugly, frankly. However, it does actually mean for the first time you can put shoes into a recycling bin and they can be recycled properly, just like any kind of plastics. In the past, basically, we've seen organizations like Adidas creating new shoes or new trainers out of ocean plastics. So this was the Parley range. We've seen Adidas also experimenting with monomaterial shoes, and this is where things like their cloud foam come through. But this is sort of one of the first organizations that has actually kind of just literally leaned into this sort of problem and found a way to fix it. Although I say the shoes are butt ugly. Now, secondly, in this week's news, now, this is an odd one. Now, when you think of quantum computers, quantum computers are run using qubits. So a quantum computer recently managed to do a very, very complex calculation that would have taken 10 septillion years to perform. The quantum computer was owned by Google, and the quantum computing chip in question was called Willow. Now, when we actually think about quantum computers, you need two things for quantum computers to really become commercially useful. The first is you need qubits, which are essentially the quantum computing chips. And you need a certain number of those for those to become sort of processingly useful. Once we get to about 10,000 qubits, things start getting interesting in terms of what we can actually do. Now, however, the other flip side of the coin is you also need those quantum computers to be accurate. Now, one of the biggest problems that we've actually had is trying to maintain the state of qubits, because thanks to quantum mechanics, the state of matter that is involved in the development of a qubit is rather unstable. So this is the first example of where artificial intelligence has been used to stabilize the state of matter on a qubit to create highly accurate quantum computers, which will lead to the commercialization of this technology in time. However, the outfit behind it is Google DeepMind, and Google DeepMind have also used artificial intelligence in the past to stabilize the plasma rings in fusion reactors. So this sort of leads me to a rather interesting use of artificial intelligence. The use of AI to stabilize highly unstable electromagnetic things and fields. Now, as this technology or this innovation improves, we could actually see the use of AI in these kinds of circumstances rapidly accelerate the development of other things. So new states of matter, new materials, new computing platforms and paradigms, and so on and so forth. So again, sort of a relatively dull piece of news, but yeah, all these things add up. Now this one is scary news. So about 6 months ago, I reported on the first fully autonomous agentic artificial intelligence cyberattack system. So what we did there, if you want to recap, was we managed to use ChatGPT's GPT-4 agents. We tied them together. We gave them the task of using and chaining together zero-day exploits to attack military-grade systems. And they cracked 53% of military-grade systems, but they did it in 2 minutes. Now, that was actually done in a university lab, so that's fine. However, once an idea starts getting out of the lab, ultimately it can be used for good and it can be used for evil. Now, in this particular case, what we've seen is we've seen the basic commercialization of fully agentic, fully autonomous cyber attack systems in the DarkNet. However, what makes this particular cyber attack platform so unique is it uses generative artificial intelligence to allow anyone to put together a fully autonomous, self-evolving, self-replicating cyber weapon. So if you think of giving individuals access to some of the specialists at the NSA who put together cyber weapon systems basically as part of their day job because they are the world's top experts, then we are seeing the democratization of cyber weapons development, let alone the fact that these are designed to be fully autonomous. Now, if you think about this from an autonomous perspective, what happens to almost any company when the number of attacks that you are presented with increases by a billionfold, a trillionfold, because it's autonomous, let alone the fact that these evolve themselves and everything else. So I encourage you to go and check that one out. We do have some defenses in there as well. So I've been doing a variety of keynotes and series with Fortinet. We've seen these things coming for quite a long time. So we do actually have some development, some defense systems in development with organizations like British Telecom in the UK that I might have talked about before, where we are developing multi-sensory, adaptive, agentic, artificial intelligence-based defense systems. Whole story in itself. Now, next piece of news. Africa. Now, when we think of Africa, Africa is a continent of 1.5 billion people. France, ironically, has a higher GDP than the entire continent of Africa, as I saw on LinkedIn the other day. So I think France's GDP is about 3.1 trillion. Africa's total GDP is about 3.1 sort of $3.01 trillion dollars. Recently, we've seen the CEO, the billionaire CEO of Reliance in India, promised to develop the world's largest artificial intelligence data center. We have Eric Schmidt, who just went in front of the Senate and said that from his perspective, we are now starting to develop 10 gigawatt artificial intelligence factories, whereas before a traditional data center would suck up about 200 to 500 megawatts. But Africa wants to catch up. So in this particular case, the billionaire CEO of a company called Cassava Technologies, based out of Zimbabwe, has decided that he's going to build Africa's largest AI factory with Nvidia. Now, on the one hand, this initiative gives the continent access to much more supercomputing power than it's ever had before. And a couple of surveys have shown that typically in Africa, only 5% of AI researchers have access to the computing performance and power that they need. So while Africa has a huge amount of talent and skill, it's lacking some of the computer infrastructure that it needs, and this is what this is designed to sort of make up for. The other sort of slight worry I have when we actually look at Africa basically is the stability of the grid and overall energy supply. So while the build out of a single AI factory isn't too much of a challenge, if you wanted to start replicating these factories across the continent, then Africa's grid needs, should we say, improving, as well as expanding. So this is, I think, very, very exciting for Africa. And I do a lot of work basically throughout the continent. So good luck to all the entrepreneurs who are going to be using this. Next, I've been doing a lot of work with the packaging industry recently. So I was down in Cannes a couple of weeks ago with organizations like Amazon, Unilever, Google, and so on and so forth. A little bit surprised to see Google at a packaging conference. That's it, but I guess they ship a lot of stuff. This is where, when we have a look at packaging just generally, and I'm going to re-record the keynote that I gave to Amazon and Google virtually because it wasn't recorded down in Cannes. About 8% of plastic packaging is recycled in the world. However, about 80% of cardboard packaging is recycled within Europe, because we've got numbers for Europe. Now, in the packaging industry, a lot of packaging experts talk about the importance of the circular economy, sustainability, consumer engagement, and so on and so forth. However, today we have to plant trees, we cut those trees down, basically we then put them into the wood chipper and we get cardboard. So this particular innovation out of ETH Zurich in Switzerland is growing cellulose from thin air. Now, the way that we do that is we lean into a trend called cellular agriculture, where we're simply using bacteria combined with ultraviolet light in this particular example to grow, how do I explain it? Sort of cellulose patties. So if you think about a traditional pancake, this particular process grows pancake-looking patties, but they are completely made out of cellulose. Now, from a packaging perspective, what this means is that we no longer need to rely on trees. We can just simply grow cellulose in situ, and then we can use that, grown from air, in future packaging. So while this technology still needs to ramp, it needs to scale, it needs to commercialize and all these kinds of different things, it joins quite a long list of different things that are now grown from air, such as whey, soya, and protein. So when we think about trying to create new resources, increasingly, we are finding new ways to combine biomanufacturing, genetic engineering, and other things with bacteria to grow things from air. Which is just, I mean, it's kind of nuts when you actually think about it. But from a sustainability perspective, bearing in mind that these actually suck down carbon dioxide as well, this is actually carbon negative packaging. So there you go, a little bit in the same way as trees, obviously. Next, I've been talking about the US Replicator drone program for quite a while. So we've got 2 US Pentagon drone replicator programs. We've got the first one, which was designed to develop very small autonomous drones for use in battle. And then the Replicator 2 program is designed to develop counter UAV drone defenses. Now, when we actually have a look at the first Replicator program, some of the fruits of the Replicator program's labor are now being used in Ukraine. So this is increasingly where we're using GPS-free, internet-free, and increasingly autonomous drones to go and do everything from reconnaissance through to bombing runs, etc., etc. So the US is sort of still, I think, largely catching up basically when it comes to the development of next generation drones and drone warfare. However, yeah, Ukraine is a testing ground. And I think certainly when the Americans think about supporting Ukraine or not supporting Ukraine, I think we also have to think about the benefits that the US military and other militaries actually have in supporting Ukraine, because they can develop new weapon systems, they can then test them in actual battle to see if they work. And as we actually see China outpacing the US military in terms of threat and capability, I think Ukraine actually has a value there. So going slightly off topic there, but nevertheless, you know, it's a war that shouldn't have been started in the first place. But yeah. Now, when we have a look at this piece of news, Connectomics. So Connectomics, no one's really ever going to have actually heard of this, but there are a number of European scientists who are using new imaging technologies to determine how the connections, the individual connections in mouse brains and the human brain actually work. Now, on the one hand, this leads us to new developments in neuroscience. It helps us understand the workings of the brain better so that we can create new neurodegenerative drugs faster and so on and so forth. However, this will also help us build better AIs. So when we have a look at the CEO of Anthropic, Dario, he's actually a human neuroscientist. So what I'm actually seeing is I'm seeing more neuroscientists research being used to help develop better AIs. Now, the reason why I think this is kind of interesting is because when we have a look at things like the large language models, like say ChatGPT, Claude 3.7, you know, Google Gemini 2.5, etc., etc., they're all trained on human language. And increasingly, these AIs' emergent behaviors demonstrate that these AIs are behaving like humans. They increasingly can be hacked using human psychology, and you can trick them into doing things in the same way that we would trick a human into lying, deceiving someone, doing insider trading, and so on and so forth. So the convergence of human neuroscience with artificial intelligence is leading more and more researchers to say that we are now in the phase where we are discovering what artificial intelligence can do rather than inventing it. Now, when we have a look at the next piece of news, this is out of Dubai. So a Dubai company has created a virtual realtor called Judisha Brown. So Judisha Brown is a artificial human, a digital being. She's got a neural network brain, so you can think of her as an intelligent bot. However, she's actually now sold over $30 million of Dubai real estate. Now, what she does here is once there's an inquiry that comes into the organization, she manages it. She walks people through virtual viewings of Dubai properties. And if someone wants to buy the property, she then passes them over to the appropriate lawyers to get them to fill in the paperwork and so on and so forth. Now, the first part of the real estate sale is largely being automated here. The legal bit is still done by humans. However, increasingly, we can see a way where the whole lot could be done autonomously. So this is sort of interesting because a little while ago, I think about 10 years ago, one of the directors at Salesforce said, you will never, ever be able to automate the salesperson. And I always said you can, because sales is a process. And if you understand the process and the flow, basically, then typically you can turn that into an AI algorithm, an AI model, and then you can go and automate it. And when we think about scaling up Judicia, I can't say that properly, slap me down for that. When we think about basically scaling this up, increasingly you have robo salespeople. Now that has impacts for the future of work and the workforce. But as we start having a look at the development of persuasive AI, so OpenAI with Sam Altman have actually been creating persuasive AI, it also opens up a potentially ethical conversation, because an AI can listen to your voice, it can understand whether or not you're lying, it can understand whether or not you're hesitant about a purchase, for example, and using its huge intelligence, yeah, if it senses that you are hesitant about buying a house, then it can start manipulating you to buy the house. So when we think about the development of trustworthy AI and AI that is able to manipulate human behaviors, you start combining these two sort of trends together, could be really good, or it could be a really slippery slope. Now next, so I do a lot of opinion pieces. So a little while ago, a study demonstrated that if you have a single bad apple in a team, then that team's productivity can fall by 40%. So I do a lot of keynotes on the future of leadership, culture, all those kinds of different things. So while this isn't necessarily technology related, I think it's actually interesting, basically, from a future of work and workforce perspective, because finally we actually have empirical evidence that just a single bad apple, that person that says, you can't do that, you're wrong, the disgruntled employee, the disruptive employee can actually destroy productivity like crazy. So actually, just on an interesting note, what would happen if we introduced a digital human, a bad apple digital human, into the AI sales process here with Judicia? Would we have the same impact? Bearing in mind that from a Connectomics perspective, if Judicia has picked up behaviors that are human-like human psychology behaviors, then technically a bad AI could destroy her productivity. I mean, you start getting into some rather silly conversations, but nevertheless, I mean, if you have a look at these 3 news articles here, you start merging those together, that alone basically could actually be a keynote presentation for somebody. Maybe me, but, hey-oh. Right. Next, we've got Visa. So Visa has been launching a new Fiat platform that helps banks accept Fiat-backed tokens. Now, again, I do a lot of work in the financial services sector. So this is the future of fintech, the future of decentralized finance, the future of banks, and so on and so forth. And one of the things I've noticed is, on the one hand, basically, we're seeing tokenization of assets. So I've talked about that before, where in the last session, I tokenized basically this board pen and then sold shares in it. But when we actually think about the tokenization of assets, central banks don't necessarily like that, because we can tokenize assets using cryptocurrencies, Web3, blockchain, all that kind of stuff. But we don't actually have to tokenize those assets using traditional fiat currencies. Now, from a central bank perspective, like the Bank of England and the European Central Bank and the People's Bank of China and the US Fed, they typically want to keep some level of control, or as much control as they can, over their fiat currencies. Now, Visa embracing fiat-backed currencies or fiat-backed tokens ultimately gives central banks a way to collateralize their own central bank digital currencies or other sort of fiat-backed tokens. So this piece of news here, ironically, helps central banks keep control while also leaning into the decentralized finance trend. Next, something that I was talking about at the World Economic Forum in Davos in January. Fake news. So there's a video basically to the event on my YouTube channel, on this YouTube channel. But during that session, I actually spoke about how we can use artificial intelligence to tank stocks and the global economy. Now, in this particular sort of piece of news, President Trump obviously put tariffs onto every country on Earth, including an island full of penguins. That's it. So those penguins are now seeing their own economies tank like crazy. Their fish exports, that's a horrible situation. However, in this particular case, there was a single piece of fake news that was posted on X that referenced a piece of news on Fox News but misrepresented it. And this single piece of news said that while President Trump has put all these tariffs on every country on Earth, he's going to announce a 90-day pause on tariffs. So, of course, all of the quantitative traders, all of the AI trading bots on Earth thought that was great. And we saw shares go up. Then, once it was revealed that that was actually fake news, we actually saw the stock markets around the world lose $2.4 trillion. Bearing in mind that, when we think about the tariffs that President Trump has initiated at the moment, we've so far seen a $10 trillion loss on the global stock exchanges. So when you actually put this into context, this represents 25% of all losses on Earth as a result of tariffs. However, when we now put this into a different context, think about your pensions. If a single piece of fake news can move the stock market by $2.4 trillion in a couple of hours, whether that corrects or not, if you're close to retirement age, all of this stuff is effing up your pension pot like crazy, let alone all of the other things and shenanigans that are happening in the world. And then this last piece of news, we always talk about fusion. So, Sam Altman talks about fusion. I know a lot of futurists that talk about fusion's around the corner. It's going to save us all. When we talk about artificial intelligence's runaway energy use, everyone says, oh, that's fine. Fusion is here. It's not. Commercial fusion is still realistically 20 years away. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So this particular company here has just installed the first Cryostat basically into a fusion plant that they want to commercialize. So in this particular case, Commonwealth Fusion have now put a Cryostat into their fusion reactor, and they think it's going to take them at least 10 years to actually commercialize this. But a Cryostat actually keeps the fusion reactors cool. We've seen the development of cold fusion recently as well. I've written about that. If you go down to the bottom of these articles, basically, then you can actually sort of click on here, for example, fusion energy and so on and so forth. But when we actually have a look at the state of fusion, we are seeing some records being set. We saw a new fusion record of 100 seconds being set. We've seen net positive energy generation, basically from the US Department of Energy's fusion reactor and so on and so forth. So this is a very small, tiny piece of news, but when we have a look at this, so this is it here, when we have a look at the Cryostat base that's now being installed within Commonwealth Fusion's reactors, we edge closer to the commercialization of fusion, but it's still going to be a long time before we're plugging in our kettles and everything else in our AI data centers into fusion power. And that's it really for this particular sort of little week's worth of news. And of course, if you are looking for a keynote speaker that can talk about emerging technologies and their impacts, especially on your business or the world, or trends and their impact on your business and the world, then why not give me a call? And as for that, thank you very much. Download the codexes for free. I hope you enjoyed this one. It was a little bit of a more random vlog, I felt, this time, because we covered shoes to fusion, etc., etc., and cardboard packaging from Air. But nevertheless, yeah, I'll go and record the next one soon, and we'll see what other news we actually end up with. Take care. Goodbye.